Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Bitachon Blast. We're up to week number 13, which is pretty amazing. Thank you for those that have been with me. Thank you for those that are here live and those that are listening to recordings. Today's is called Rav Zishe's lesson. And Rav Asher had a very fascinating relationship with Hasidim. He had some Hasidic Talmidim, so they'll have different versions about that. But he considered himself a Talmud of the Klosenberg Rebbe. The Klosenberg Rebbe was a survivor of the Holocaust, and after he lived in New York for many years, he spent the rest of his life in Eretz Yisrael, and he was a very open-minded Rebbe when it came to Chassidus and Misnagdus. And I think most people over the years have kind of adapted, but Rav Asher used to always quote that the Klosenberg Rebbe used to say, he wasn't into osos and mofsim. He would say, osos and mofsim ba'abas nechum. Those are in the domain of Goyim. That's not what makes us from people that the Rebbe could do osos and mofsim. He held that the Rebbe could do osos and mofsim as a derivative of his kedusha. And Rav Asher used to always say that the Klosenberg Rebbe would quote the Heilige Gru, the Vilna Gaon. The Gru was anti-Chassidus. His Talmud, Rav Chaim Volozhin, was anti-Chassidus. It wasn't until the next generation, Rav Itzel Volozhin, who kind of made peace when he was Rosh Yeshiva Volozhin with Chassidim. But it took a long time. It took till the late 1800s before it was integrated. Anyway, so Rav Asher quotes a lot of Hasidic thoughts. They're usually overlap between Hasidus and not, but Rav Zishe is definitely probably one of the more famous Hasidic Meisim. So I wanted to give that little introduction about how to look at Hasidus from Rav Asher. So we're in essay 13. In this essay, we will share the powerful story and message of the famous Rebbe, Rav Zishe of Hanipol, who was born in 1718 and died in 1800. So that's literally the golden era of Hasidus, forming, right, Talmidei Abel Shem, who embodied the Bitachon being discussed in Chovos HaLevavos. Everyone knows the story of Zishe. And one of the questions, before I say what the story is, but one of the questions people ask me all the time is was Rav Zishe exaggerating? Or did Rav Zishe know that he was Rav Zishe? So we'll try to ask that question at the end. Let us review it and make a kinyan in its lesson because it's fundamental. Rav Zishe was the one who brought his brother, the Noam Elimelech, to Chasidus. A lot of the original Hasidim were not Hasidim, obviously, by introducing him to the famous Maggid, Rav Dov Ber Mizrich, who again was born around 1710, died in 1772. He was from a third generation of Hasidim. First came the Baal Shem Tov, 1700 to 1760s, then the Maggid, then Rav Zishe and Rav Elimelech were very famous. Rav Zishe had, Rav Asher used to always tell over a story that when he was in the infirmary, which they used to have that kind of dates the story in itself to the 60s, but when he was in Panovich Yeshiva, he was sick and he went to the infirmary and he read Shivchei HaBaal Shem, and he said the famous thing that, if you believe all the stories that you read, you're an idiot. And if you believe none of them, then you're Apikaris. So most of them were pretty wild. He would tell over a few with where the Baal Shem Tov would tell the Baal Agala just drive and they would end up in places. Anyway, Rav Zishe had terribly yisurin throughout his life, just like Eov. He lived in abject poverty. His wife was always sick. They lost many children, and he suffered from illness as well. Yet he always had tremendous simcha. In his own city, no one knew him as the Gadol Torah that he was, only as a modest pauper who learned and smiled a lot. A Talmud asked his Rebbe how one could fulfill the Gemara in Brachos 33b that teaches that one must make a bracha on good events with simcha, just like one makes a bracha on good tidings. On bad events with simcha, just like he makes a bracha on good tidings. His Rebbe sent him to Rav Zishe in Hanipol to learn. He arrived in Hanipol and asked to be brought to the Rebbe Rav Zishe. And he was told there is no Rebbe Rav Zishe here. There's a pauper named Zishe in a broken down section of town. He, Nebuch, has a lot of challenges. That's what he was told. So he wasn't a famous person in that way. The student knocked on the door and was greeted with a warm smile by Rav Zishe. He observed the poverty and pain and suffering in the house and asked Rav Zishe his question. My Rebbe sent me to learn how one can make a bracha on bad tidings with simcha. Rav Zishe replied, you were sent to me to learn that? You must have the wrong address. How could I be expected to explain this to you? I never saw any bad in my life. All that I experienced is Chazdei Hashem, the greatest kindness from Hashem. This is the story and the lesson of the great Rebbe Rav Zishe. So again, I've gotten a number of emails where people ask me, did Rav Zishe really believe what he was saying? Was he really not aware of the sad things that were happening to him? Okay, so many of us have done Daf Yomi, and the Gemara in the end of Shabbos talks about the importance of being dan l'kav zechus. And it says there was a sharecropper who worked for 3 years, and at the end of 3 years, he wanted to go back home for Yantif, which was the minhag. You would work for 3 years, you would dedicate yourself to the field, and you would go back to you would go back to your family, and that's how you would support them for maybe a few years till you got your next job. So the Gemara says that there was a chassid that had a job, and he was a sharecropper, and it was time for him to leave, and he told him, okay, he told the owner of the field, another Erlich Jew, that my time is up. And the Gemara says that he told him, so could you please pay me? I have to go feed my family. And the owner was a very rich man with lots of property, lots of produce, lots of everything. And the owner said, I'm sorry, I have no way to pay you. And the Gemara gives a whole dialogue where he asked him, what about fruits? What about this? What about that? All of them, he said, no, I can't give it to you. So the Gemara says that he left. Now, make a note there, but it's not what the Gemara says. But anyway, it says something else. He went home, and then right after Sukkot, his master came, brought him food, which is the whole shayla why that's not ribbis. Anyway, and gave him the money he owed him. And he said to him, when I told you I had no money, what did you think? And he said, I judged you favorably, and I thought that maybe you had business and your money was tied up, and maybe you donated your money for hektish. And he goes through a whole list of like four or five things that he was done in the kavz chus. And so he said, okay, and you're right, all those things, exactly what you said, that was true. So the Gemara says that it ends off, and he says that just like you were don mi l'kavz chus, so Hashem should be don you l'kavz chus. So the Mefarshim talk about this Gemara. Okay, so before I tell you, the Gemara says that when this man left, Yatza b'pchi nefesh, he left very upset. Makes sense. He worked for 3 years. He's supposed to go home and feed his family. He walked out upset. It says he was upset, but he was still a chassid, the Gemara calls him, and he still, accepted it. Now, the Mefarshim, the Gemara brings down two other stories with other people and don l'kavz chus. I and Shem at the end of Shabbos, somewhere in the Kuf Chav Tes Beis or so. So the question is like this. So everyone knows, it's famous that who is this person? This was Rabbi Akiva. It was Rabbi Akiva while he was in Am Haaretz. This is what he did for a living. He was in Am Haaretz, but he was an honest guy, and we know this from other sources. And the Mefarshim in the back bring this down. There's other sources of Psikta that bring down the story. Now, you might say, well, wait a minute, it says he was married and he had children. That's also true. According to Chazal, Rabbi Akiva was actually married 3 times. Before he married his middle wife, Rachel, the second wife, he actually had a wife that died and left him with a child, and that child was actually the one who studied Torah with him. We talked about this, on Lag Bomer. Anyway, so in that case, you could say, well, he was a chassid. Well, Rabbi Akiva was a total Am Haaretz. So the fact that he walked away upset, that does, okay, fine. So you can't bring a proof from this guy. But if you look at the Ran is a Rishon, right? The Ran actually disagrees with this, and he brings down the Gemara Bava Kama. The Gemara says everywhere in Shas that it says a chassid echad, the story happened with the chassid. This is Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava or Rabbi Yehuda ben Rabbi Lai. So we're talking about Tanaim. So according to him, at least when this man walked away, he walked away upset. Now you could say, were these Tanoim any less than Rav Zishe? Rav Zishe could say, you're coming to my house and you're asking me about troubles and tribulations. I don't have any troubles and tribulations. The answer, the way I understand it, is that it's obvious that Rav Zishe knew he had these problems. Rav Zishe knew that he suffered. Rav Zishe knew that his wife was sick and that his children died and that he had lived in abject poverty. But his attitude was, this is from the Ribono Shalom, so who am I to complain? If it's from the Ribono Shalom, who am I to complain? And that's the attitude. And I don't think he's any less than this chassid that walked away with pchi nefesh. So I think it's very important. The Seforno says this as well, or Victor Miller was a big speaker about this. It says, Vayavo Avraham lispo the Sarah of the Plosa. Avraham cried about his wife Sarah that died, and he mourned over her. There's a lot of people that think that Torah is not supposed to have feeling, that if a person has a sadness, they're supposed to just ignore it. That's not the Torah way. A person has feelings, a person has emotions. So even Rav Zishe, I believe, my personal answer, and I've asked this to a lot of people, I think it's pashut that Rav Zishe felt all of his lack as well. But when you're asking me that Kishen Shavarach al Ra, he was so aware of himself that as he worked through all these things, he was able to say to him, I don't have any Ra, I have Tov, because that was the madriga that he was on, and that's what he felt. He worked it through. But of course, when things happen, he had feelings and he felt things as well. He's no less than that chassid, that sharecropper, at least according to some, who's a Tana, who Yatzav B'Chi Nefesh, he walked away upset and disappointed. I'm supposed to feed my wife, I'm supposed to feed my children. How am I supposed to take care of my family? Okay. Rav Asher continues with the story. A Talmud of mine who lives in Montastorf area greatly impressed me. I tell over the story often. I met up with him and sensed something was wrong, and I asked him what was going on. He didn't want to tell me. After hesitation, he said, my parents want me to come back to America to join the family business, so my father no longer wants to pay my rent in Eretz Yisrael to allow me to continue to learn. I know that can be triggering for some people that are hearing this, but those that knew Rav Usher understood that to him, Torah was the ikar, and that was the focus, and that certainly makes a lot of sense. If someone pays for you to go to medical school so you can make an impact on the world, that's a great thing. If that's what your natiyas in life are, and if someone pays for you to become a Gadol Torah, that's also a great thing for you. So on top of that, the apartment that I'm renting just got sold, and I need to move out. My father told me I have 2 months to go back to America. That's what the Talmud said. And I don't know where to move and how I could still sit and learn, because that's important to us. I asked him, do you believe Gamzu Latova? It's all for the best. The Rebbeinu Shalom knows what's best for you. My Talmud smiled and said, yes, you taught me this. I understand it. And that's the reality that we're living with. A week later, I met up with him, and he was dancing in the street. He told me that he and his father had a showdown and openly talked about his needs. His father said, enough, just come home. My Talmud replied, Daddy, I appreciate all that you've done for me, and I'm grateful for your support in the past. I also need you to know that my passion in life is Torah. My wife and I have decided that we don't care about the money. We're staying in Kol and Eretz Yisrael with our 5 kids, even if that means we're going to live on the street. I respect your feelings that you can no longer offer support, and I know that Hashem will take care of us. His father replied, I thought that I would win, but if you're so obstinate and you're so dedicated to Torah, then I'm not going to pay your rent anymore. Instead, I'll buy you a place to live in Eretz Yisrael, so please just let me know where you want to live. Both the father and son were very satisfied, because obviously, even a father who doesn't understand the value of Torah does understand to some degree and appreciates that his son is happy. What a lesson in Bitachon. A friend of mine used to play racquetball squash. This is actually one of my favorite stories in the book. People ask me that also sometimes. He incurred a terrible injury while playing racquetball, where he was accidentally hit in the eye with a racket. He was rushed to the hospital, and they put on a bandage, giving him strict orders for bed rest. His eye's recovery lay in the balance. They weren't sure if he would ever see again. After 2 weeks, his wife took him to the hospital to have the bandage removed by the doctors. They pulled it off, and his eye began to gush blood. His wife interpreted this as a failure in the healing and fainted on the spot, fearing the worst. When she woke up, the doctor explained to them that they had just witnessed the most crucial part of the man's amazing recovery. There was dirt inside his eye that had been preventing it from healing. The doctor couldn't remove the dirt, as the eye was too sensitive. In the process, they feared they would blind him. However, now that it had bled this powerfully, it washed out the eye from the inside out, and now we expect him to have a full recovery in his vision, which is exactly what happened. Says Rav Usher, this is such an important lesson. In life, we sometimes see blood. We think things are all bad, but we must realize that nothing ever happened, is happening, or will happen to you in the past, present, or future, but is not in line with Hashem's plan for what is best for you. The blood in the story was the greatest and most important part of the recovery, and we always have to remember that things in life seem bad, but that's what Rav Zishe was able to say after he felt the pain and after he felt the suffering. He was able to say, "But Hashem runs the world," and that's what it means to Mevarach al Tov, to recognize that. Trust the Rebbeinu Shalom who is caring for you, even if things look very bad. Know that Hashem knows what's best for you. To clarify, and Rav Usher says this himself, Rav Zishe certainly had pain and felt it deeply, but he didn't call it ra, bad. He accepted it with love and davened to Hashem take care of him. That's why I tell people when they ask me about Rav Zishe, he felt it. He accepted it with love and he davened to Hashem to take care of him. He knew a deep bitachon that was all for the best. If one is Makabel Yisur Ba'ava, he accepts suffering with love, then it becomes the strongest merit for Hashem to forgive his sins. If one grumbles, he diminishes the merit. And again, we're so myopic. We don't, Hashem has the bird's eye view, and that's the way we have to look at life. And finally, Rav Usher concludes, there are 2 types of Yisur. There's end in itself pain. This is the best situation that Hashem wants you to be able to purify yourself. And there's a means to an end pain. The pain that will help one daven to become a better person. Like Chazal say, why were the Avos and Imos unable to have children? Hashem wanted them to daven and get closer to him through their heartfelt pleas. That's like Gemara in Yevamos 64b. We often don't know which category your Yisurim fall under, and thus we daven to him while accepting that he knows what's best. And that's really our perspective in life. And the more we recognize this and the more we teach it to our children and family, the more successful our lives will be. Thank you so much for joining. And Mr. Shem, we'll see you again next week. There have been a couple people that have asked me about schedule change. So I'm looking into that, and I'll try to send out a poll. I think I'm going to switch it to Tuesday or Wednesday night, either sometime in the next few weeks or starting in September. I don't want to mess up the balance now, but I'll definitely send that out ahead of time and maybe switch that around. Any questions or comments? All right. Thank you, everybody. And I hope you have a great week. Take care.
You too.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.